This is Cogitations with Carl Hartman, minister at Main Street Church of Christ in Lockney.
Well, good morning. I hope your Sunday morning is off to a terrific beginning, and I'm glad you're able to tune in and join me here on 106.1 The Flip FM for another installment of Cogitations. We're continuing our quest, our journey in looking at and examining love and what the characteristics of love are really like and what they look like. And we kind of left off last time approaching in on looking at particularly in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And I had made mention at the conclusion of our last program that's where we would kind of go and conclude our exploration on love. In order to evaluate the measure of something that one possesses and their growth in that thing, and this particular aspect we're looking at love, it is useful to break it down into specific measurable characteristics. We do that with almost anything in life if we want to measure progress. I remember when I was in the Navy and I was recording hours to work towards a journeyman's license. The Department of Labor and the Navy had a partnership, and so whatever your career field in the Navy was, they'd mirror it to the closest civilian equivalent, and you would record hours. But in those timesheets, it was broken down by various disciplines within electromechanical engineering. That was my field. And so we would record those hours, and you could see the growth, see the progress towards accumulating the necessary hours in each area. Well, just like that, our love is something that we can break down to specific measurable characteristics. With something that is abstract and lacks physical qualities, you can put a yardstick to. An individual must rely on their own honest evaluation. So when it comes to our love, we have to give ourselves an honest look. Look at those characteristics. How are we growing in them? And so we give ourselves this honest evaluation. Of course, we have to start by giving ourselves an evaluation to begin with to create a baseline. And from that baseline, we begin to see how we grow and how we improve. Fortunately, God has seen fit to provide the specific characteristics for this ultimate love in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. And so we're going to take a look at that and look at those characteristics. As we look at this chapter, of course, Paul starts by pointing out in the opening of the chapter that without this love, it is impossible to gain anything, referring to anything of eternal significance. He lays out in 4 concise verses the characteristics that comprise this love. This is, in essence, the letics part of Loveletics. That's the term that I've used in relation to love, because it's something that we have to practice. And this shows us the characteristics that we are practicing in this love. So if you're there in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we can find beginning in verse 4, these characteristics begin to be laid out. And so we learn from verse 3, in which I already referenced, that there at the close, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Without love, there is no profit. And of course, it's talking about this ultimate love that is presented here. And as I've mentioned already in the pursuit of this topic in previous installments here on Cogitations, this love is separate from emotion. Emotion is not required to obtain and to practice this love, which is a fortunate thing because we're called to practice this love on total strangers that we have no connection to. We're called to practice this love even on our enemies, who our emotions would push us in the exact opposite direction of displaying love. So let's look at these. I'm just going to read these few verses, and then we're going to break down those individual components. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And then the beginning of verse 8, love never fails. And so if we can master the characteristics of this kind of love, it will grant us success in a lot of the interactions that we have with others. Now, various translations use various terms in relationship to these characteristics, but when you break all those terms down, they come out to have the same definition or same general meaning. So let's start with love is patient. Translation I read from said long suffering. Love is patient. The first listed characteristic is one that must be developed in order to sustain the others. It is through the application of patience that an individual can work towards the growth needed in the characteristics, because the practice of these other characteristics can test your patience, especially when practiced towards those that do not strive to live according to the same principle of love. Patience is measured in time, specifically the time you can maintain your patience of any other characteristic of love without surrendering to frustration, anger, or hate. That next characteristic is kindness. Love is kind. Kindness is an act that we can choose to show to others on a daily basis in any interactions that we might have with individuals throughout any given day. Remember, this love and its characteristics is something we choose to do. Thus, we don't have to feel an urging to do it. We simply are in the moment, in the situation, and we choose to act with kindness. In any situation, those who allow their actions to be directed by this characteristic of love decide that their actions and or words given in response or reaction to a situation will be kind. Regardless of how poorly an individual's own day is developing, they can choose to conduct themselves kindly towards others, all others. The love that is directed by rational choice instead of controlled by self-centered emotions can be kind, even in the worst times of our life. Choice matters. So choose to be kind and thus display the love God has commanded. Kindness can be practiced everywhere we go to every individual if we simply choose to. Even when our day is going terrible, we can choose to just pause and separate ourselves from our own misfortune and be kind to others. Love does not envy. With this characteristic of this higher love, we begin a long list of the does nots and is nots characteristics of this love, or maybe better stated, characteristics that are not practiced by an individual motivated by this higher level of love. So these should be absent from our displays of love. Envy or jealousy is the gateway to so many other negative characteristics and actions. The desire of what others have, whether material things, fame, position, etc., is first rooted in selfish emotion, and second is a dangerous spiral that leads to a never-quenched thirst for more. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 1 and 2, Paul points to the fact that one who has been raised with Christ, thus one who has chosen to walk according to this love, does not have their heart and mind set on earthly things, but on heavenly ones. With one's heart and mind so aligned, envy, with regards to things of this world, the priorities of this world, no longer have power to control one's ability to practice love. This true, highest form of love simply is not steered by envy or jealousy. It is not part of the equation. So we choose to not be envious. We choose to not be jealous, and thus not have those obstacles hindering us from practicing this love. Love does not boast, is not proud. These two characteristics are so intertwined that they should be explored together. The boasting that is spoken of here, as well as the pride, is not of a health nature, but of an over-agitated nature. The word boast, particularly in the original language, lends itself to the concept of vanity. The word proud translates puffed up in the King James Version, carries the concept of being haughty. Both in this application involve the exalting of oneself at the belittling of another. These negative characteristics that love is to not possess would stand in contradiction not only to the characteristics of kindness, but other characteristics yet to be explored before us. You see, when we're so self-absorbed in our own vanity, when we are stepping on others to elevate ourselves and to make ourselves look better, how can we possibly practice the love that God would desire for us to do to all people? It would be a hindrance to being kind, to being considerate, to helping others, to encouraging others, when our mind is set on simply diminishing them so that we look better. Love does not dishonor others. With or without the two negative characteristics that we just noted that are focused on the detrimental exaltation of self, an outward purposeful effort can be practiced by an individual to belittle others. The King James here uses the phrase, doth not behave itself unseemly, denoting the outward observance of this negative characteristic. Simply put, this is a behavior that is linked to boastfulness and pridefulness, that not only serves to falsely exalt oneself, but simultaneously serves to diminish others. Jesus captures the full essence of all three of these negative characteristics in his discourse recorded in the 18th chapter of Luke in verse 9 through 14. Jesus spoke this parable to those which were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on others. Two men went into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed about himself, saying, God, I thank you that I am not as other people, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. But the tax collector stood at a distance, would not so much as lift up his eyes towards heaven, but beat his chest, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you that this man went to his house justified rather than the other, because those that exalt themselves shall be cast down, and those that humble themselves will be lifted up. Love is not self-seeking. To be self-seeking would be in strict opposition to the foundational principles of selfless sacrifice. That is a core trademark of this level of love. The very love that prompted God to send Jesus to the cross, and the self-same love that constrained Jesus to willingly go to the cross. To be self-seeking would violate the very attitude of Christianity. Note Paul's inspired words to the disciples at Philadelphia in the first 4 verses of the 2nd chapter of Philippians. Paul expresses this concept as follows. If you have any encouragement in Christ, any comfort of love, any fellowship of the Spirit, any affection and mercy, then complete my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done out of selfish ambition or self-conceit, but in humbleness of mind let each esteem others better than themselves, looking not to your own self-interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Paul further points out in the 5th verse that this is the same mindset or attitude possessed by Jesus, the mindset that led him to make the ultimate sacrifice of love. These not qualities of true Christian love, the higher love of God, these characteristics that should not be a part of this love but needs to be absent from it, are the characteristics that removes self out of the equation. I love what Paul penned in Galatians 2:20. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. You see, we got to cut I out of the equation. And our desires, our motivations, the I is gone. When we enter that watery grave of baptism, we are crucifying self, just like Jesus died on the cross for us. We are putting ourselves to death and rising up a new creation in Christ to live for him. So it's no longer I, but it's Jesus that navigates and directs our thoughts, our minds, our intentions, our motivations. So once I am out of the equation with my own conceit, my own envies and jealousies, my own self-interest, once that's removed, then I can practice the other qualities of this love, because it's no longer about me, but it's about what I, in the name of Christ, can do for others. And so I practice this love without myself being in the equation. The next one, love is not easily provoked. It is with this characteristic that developing the first characteristic of love provides the greatest benefit. And that first one, to remind you, was patience. Love is patient, long-suffering. In many interactions in life, there are those individuals and situations that really push the provocation buttons, and anger builds up until it erupts. Anger can be very difficult to maintain control over, but mastery over it can and must be achieved. James, in the 19th verse of the first chapter of his letter, warns that disciples should be slow to rise to the state of being overcome by their violent passions, often translated either anger or wrath. But if you broke it all out in the original language, it'd be slow to rise to the state of being overcome by violent passions. Violent passions. The following verse states the reason for this warning. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. It is difficult to do the righteous work of God when you are controlled by emotions that lead to anger, to wrath, to violence. Paul directs in the 4th chapter of his letter to the Ephesians, Ephesians chapter 4, in verse 26, that if an individual is provoked to the point of anger, that they should be careful not to sin, and that they should quickly depart from this state of anger. Specifically, do not allow it to last to the end of the day. Don't let the sun set on your anger, the verse says. It is difficult in a state of violent passion to maintain the rational self-control not to sin by word or deed. Thus, Paul encourages in his letter to the Colossians in the 3rd chapter, the 8th verse, but now rid yourself of all these, anger, wrath, malice, slander, filthy communication out of your mouth. All of these tend to manifest as an individual loses over to anger, and the rest begin to follow if that anger is left unchecked. So love is not easily provoked. because we can't practice the positive qualities of this higher love if we are provoked to anger easily, because anger cannot work the righteousness of God. Love keeps no record of wrongs. How often is heated exchanges between individuals of all different levels or relationships does past offenses become ammunition in the argument? It is so easy to remember and use such when emotion is ruling the exchange. It is a difficult thing to forgive, truly forgive and forget. But this is what the love that is commanded demands. We must choose to let the past stay in the past and not keep it ever alive in the present. The Hebrew writer reminds us that God himself practices this characteristic of forgiving and forgetting. The 8th chapter and 20th verse reads, "For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities I will remember no more." The sincere practice of this love strives to reach a level where one can push from their mind all past grievances. The real secret to accomplishing this is simply to leave no grievance unresolved, to linger and fester and grow. Matthew records in the 5th chapter, starting in the 23rd verse of his gospel account, Jesus' following words. "Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift at the altar and go first and be reconciled to your brother. Then return and offer your gift." Do not leave things festering. Reconcile all things. Forgive and forget, and don't let the past overshadow the present, and thus hinder your ability to practice this higher love. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. God's truth is righteousness, and thus stands in strict opposition to that which is evil. It is impossible to sincerely exhibit the other characteristics of this love commanded by God for all those who strive after righteousness to have any delight in the things that are evil by their very nature. To delight in evil would be an opposite the very truth of God that informs us of this love those who belong to Him are to practice. God's word makes it very plain in many passages, but consider this one written by Paul in the closing verse of Romans chapter 1. "Who knows the righteous judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but pleasure in them that do them." This comes at the end of a long list of evil acts, acts condemned by God with the penalty of death. This verse notes that those that do these things are not the only ones deserving of the penalty, but those that delight in the evil that is done. True love finds no pleasure in what is evil, either in the doing or the watching. So we need to have a attitude towards evil that rejects it, that pushes it from our lives, that doesn't accept it in any way, shape, or form, because that hinders our ability to practice this true love. Love always. The 7th verse of this 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians contains 4 characteristics that are all preceded with always. These 4 characteristics are not a sometime thing, not an occasional thing, not a most of the time thing, but an all the time characteristic that is continuously on full display during every circumstance. It's a tall order, I know. The very nature of this love demands that one not only assumes the best about other individuals, trusts, believes, but also defends, protects, bears, covers other individuals in every way. Physical protection, emotional protection, protection of reputation, etc. This love also maintains a positive outlook in that it always hopes to anticipate with pleasurable expectation in all things in life. All these things are possible with the mastery of the final characteristic, always perseveres. kind of like going back to the beginning. We start with always patient. Love is patient. And we're kind of closing out with love perseveres, it endures. And so we always need to be assuming the best. We always need to be defending and protecting and trusting. We always need to be persevering in the practice of the qualities of this love. The final characteristic that allows the individual to endure no matter the intensity of a situation is critical. It matches up with where this list of characteristics began. Love is patient. Patient perseverance in the face of the worst that the world and individuals of the world can throw at you will allow the practitioner of this love to maintain all other characteristics demanded by this love commanded by God. Like any discipline that an individual seeks to master, this one also takes time and effort to become ever increasing in proficiency and ultimately mastery. This too takes patient perseverance applied towards oneself. You see, this ultimate love that we can practice for others, we also need to practice on ourselves. Be kind to ourselves. Be patient with ourselves. We need to be kind to ourselves. We need to help ourselves grow in Christ so that we can in turn reflect that same love towards others, the love that God first demonstrated to us. We're coming close to the end of our program today, and I mentioned about measuring this love. And I have a chart in a book that I have on Amazon and Kindle called Loveletics. And in the back of that book, which is most of the material that we've shared on this topic is contained in there as well, there's just a chart that helps you kind of navigate this love in your life. Kind of take snapshots of where you're at, but you don't need the book to get it. You can simply go down and list those characteristics of love on a piece of paper. Patience, kind, not envious, not boastful, not haughty, does not dishonor others, not self-seeking, not easily provoked, not a keeper of records of wrongs, not delighting in evil, rejoicing in truth, always trusting, always protecting, always hopeful, always persevering. And then think about each one and rate yourself from 0 to 10. How patient am I on a scale of 1 to 10? If you have absolutely no patience whatsoever, that's a 0. If you are the picture of perfect patience in everything, that's a 10. I guarantee you we all fall somewhere in between. How kind am I? How much do I practice kindness to others in every situation? And this is sometimes small things. Just holding the door open for somebody when their hands are full coming in or out of the grocery store. Simple acts of kindness. How kind am I? How much do I display kindness to others in my life? And you can just go down the list. When it comes to the nots, you want, of course, how good am I at controlling my envy, controlling my boastfulness, controlling my haughtiness, how much do I dishonor others? Am I good at not dishonoring them? And so some of these things we want a lack of. Some of these we want an abundance of. But what this does on the first go is let us see where we're at. And then as we move forward, we can look at it again from time to time and see if we're growing in the right direction. Well, I hope that this series has been an encouragement to you and that it will help you in practicing this higher love that God desires for us to practice to others. I hope you have a blessed week. I hope you have a blessed day. I hope you find the time to engage with God's people in worship and Bible study. Find a place to plug in because we can help one another grow in this love. Have a blessed week, and I look forward to talking with you again next Sunday morning at 9 a.m. here on Cogitations.
Tune in next Sunday at 9 for another edition of Cogitations with Carl Hartman, minister at Main Street Church of Christ in Lockney.